Okay, so everything we're doing today, just doing the intervals of everything that's positive. So we're still going to use interval notation, so we'll get some practice on this one. So here's what we got. Positive intervals. Basically, this is anything that is above the x-axis. So if it's so again, we're looking for this case anything up or down, basically above the x-axis. So anything above the x-axis, that's a positive interval. Anything that's below the x-axis, that's going to be a negative interval. Okay, and all we're going to do, and this one's, and I know yesterday when we were talking about the increasing and decreasing, that was a little tougher because you had to kind of look at it, even though we were looking at it side to side, finding that part of describing it was a little bit tougher. Hopefully with this one today, it'll be a little bit easier as we're going through these. So positive is just anything that's above the x-axis. Anything that's negative, that's anything that's below the x-axis. Okay, so what we're going to do with this one is, again, just to kind of color code it to make things a little bit easier. Anything that's positive, we're going to make it yellow. Anything negative, we're going to make it green. Okay, so and same as yesterday. This one hopefully should be pretty easy. So if we find anything that's positive, everybody okay? That's this part of the graph from here to here. Because there's your x-axis, that's your cutoff line. So if we do this, cut your graph off. You need everything above the x-axis, so that part would be positive. Okay. And they're going to ask you for the interval. And same thing with this one. When you describe these, you're going to, because we're talking about the x-axis, you're going to use all the x values on this part. So basically, you tell me you're going to start here, you're going to go up to here, and you're going to stop here. So you're going to tell me the x values, because everything is with the x-axis. You're going to tell me the x values where this thing is positive. That starts at, got to find it there. Okay, that's -2. And it stops at +2. So when I ask you for the interval where it's positive, or what's the positive interval, it's just -2 to +2. Okay, and then same thing with what we talked about yesterday. That at that point it's actually on the axis. So for these, unless it's off somewhere up here, most of the time we're going to be using parentheses, more than likely. Okay, and if we do the negative interval, again, that helps you back up here. So kind of like we did yesterday when we were doing the increasing and decreasing, you know, figuring out what it was, we use the x values. Same thing on this one. You're only using the x values. Okay, so if that's everything that's positive, everything negative then is everything that's below the x-axis. So it's everything down here. So we'll shade that part of the graph in. So that's negative from here to here, and then negative from there to there. Okay, and again on this one, the arrow goes down here, so this thing goes forever. So that thing goes forever. That's going to be negative infinity. Okay, and then we stop when we get to this point, which would be this point right here at -2. Again, again, that's the positive part, so we're not even looking at it. Once we get back to here, we skip over, so that's where we're going to do that U again. We're going to start back at positive 2, and this thing goes forever. That's going to be 2 to infinity. Okay, so again, positive part's up here. Again, we're only going to use the x value, so this starts at -2 on the x-axis. It stops at positive 2. X-axis, this thing goes forever this way, so it's going to keep chasing this thing out to negative infinity over here. Same thing on that one, it go to positive infinity. Okay, now the hardest part about these problems is that a lot of times you're going to get one question and it's going to ask you to do like everything. So that's one of those you almost have to just do like one piece at a time. Try not to do everything at one time. Just you almost have to kind of look at the parts of it and figure out, all right, what's positive and negative. Then if it asks for increasing and decreasing, then you almost like to start over and like if you could do this, if this was a test question, there's where you'd have your positive and negative. It's almost like you just want to kind of erase everything and start over. So that then if you had to talk about what's increasing and decreasing, well, that part would be increasing from here to here, and then you're decreasing from there to there. So when you're doing these problems, if they ask you like 5 or 6 things to do sometimes, just do one thing and then kind of like flush it out and start over and then do something else. If you're in Math Excel, I think it's a little easier because I don't think they ask for like everything all at one time. Usually they just ask for one thing. So that's a little bit easier. But test-wise, sometimes it's easier just to kind of do one little piece of it. We'll try to ask it where we don't do everything at one time. Some questions we kind of may throw everything at you just to make sure that we got it there. But we'll have some of them where we break it up in parts and pieces of it too. Okay, so number 2. Same thing on this one. First off, we're going to figure out what's positive on the interval. And we're also going to do the interval that's negative. All right, and we're actually going to tweak this one a little bit because it's one of those where it's... So on your graph, where this comes down and like makes a point right here, make this so that instead of making it a point, make it so it kind of rounds off and stays just above the x-axis there. Because the way it's drawn, it's not going to be a really good answer with it, so we're going to tweak it just a little bit. So we're going to make it a W where it's more kind of like that. Okay, so we look at the interval that's positive here. We did that, right? Again, we're tweaking that one, so instead of it coming down and hitting a point and coming back, we're going to round it off so it doesn't quite touch the x-axis there, because I think that's the way this thing was meant to be. So if we look at the point on the left, this thing goes forever, correct? We kept going, we're going to keep going this way forever. So that's negative infinity to positive infinity. And that's a terrible infinity, by the way. I don't know if that's any better, but anyway. Okay, which means if everything is positive, what's negative? Nothing, right? So it should be an NA. Or you could put none, or something like that. That if they have, usually a lot of times, especially with Math Excel, they'll give you an option like where you've got like all real numbers, and then they also have like no numbers. So they may give you an option in Math Excel sometimes where you may have something like that where if everything is positive, that means nothing's negative. So they may give you like a an NA or a none or no, it's just something like that where it's not possible. They may have like a button where you have a circle where it says not possible for something like that. Okay, so kind of a trick question, but that one's kind of good. and again, we rounded that thing off because the way they had it drawn, where it like hit this line, then that part would have been positive, and then the next part would have been positive from there to there, and then we just skipped over this number, and then we had that part again. So to me, the way it was, I don't think it was drawn correctly, so we're going to tweak that one. So we changed it just a little bit where we had that one, because that makes that a whole lot easier to answer that question. Okay, and then one more here at the bottom. So, oh, actually on this one, if y'all want to, take a minute. See what you think for the answers, because again, we've got your answer, interval positive, interval that's negative here. Take a minute or two. I'm not going to check it, so don't worry. If you don't get it correct, that's fine. But see what you think the interval positive and interval negative would be. Again, every time you do these, it might be interval or it might be intervals. There might be like a two-part answer. But just take a minute. See if you write down what you think the answer is. Just take a minute or two, and then we'll come back in a second and check that one. Here. So again, that's if you want to, you can even take a piece of paper and like cover it up. That's everything that's up here. So that started at -2. And that stopped over here at that point. That's it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's -2 to 4. Okay. So then if we're going to the negative, well, that's everything below the line. So that's going to be everything down here. That's that part. Okay, so we got two pieces. You've got this part on the left. We've got that part on the right. So for the interval that's negative, again, if you check this thing, it goes forever. So that's going to be negative infinity that it goes to. It gets up to this point that's here. Well, that's basically that point that started the positive. That's going to end this part that's negative. So that's going to be negative infinity up to -2. We're skipping the positive part, so they're going to have our u that's here. And then we're starting at this point, which on the x, and it's kind of good if you do this because it gives you the x value, so it's easier to see. We're starting at 4, and then we go forever. So then we're going to go from 4 out to infinity. Okay, so there we go. So everything, and again, it's just a little different spin off of what we did yesterday. Some of the problems, they'll ask for it in different pieces. I think there's a problem that we'll do a little bit later on to practice on one that we'll do like everything, which sometimes gets a little tougher. But that's where, if you got a calculator, if you don't have a little piece of paper like that, that's where you can just take your calculator, and cover up that part of it so you can see what's positive. Then you cover up that part of it, see what's negative, and then hopefully that will kind of help you to write out some of those. If you're doing increasing and positive, if you're doing like decreasing and increasing like we were doing yesterday, that's where you can kind of do the same thing. If you know that that part's increasing, then you can look at just that part and write it down. There's our constant part that was right there, so then you can write that part down. And then there's your decreasing part that would be there, so then you could write those points down. So it might be good if you've got a calculator or your pen or a little small piece of paper or something that you can kind of cover things up. And that way you can look at it like one little piece at a time. So there's your increasing part. There's the constant part. There's decreasing part, and all of a sudden, there's another constant part that's right there. So then you can have another little piece that go from there. And again, big thing on these, whenever we're doing all those things, the only time you worry about the up and down part is when we talk about the range. Everything else, you're going to be using the x values. So you're always working along whatever the x values are for this one. So, you can ignore the y values and just worry about your x values when we talk about negative or positive or increasing or decreasing or anything like that.